2, 1.
Good afternoon, friends. From me, Adri-Marie, and I'm joined with Tom and Anathi. So I hope we are familiar faces to you by now. So the three of us work in rhythm every day. So the story of the rhythm really started many years ago with a congregation that Tom and his wife started together with a group of friends, which I was also part of, that asked the question, what does it mean to follow Jesus? And then we kind of got inspired by the early church, and we studied the Gospels and came together and said, all right, so what does it mean? And we really in the end came up with a few symbols that then we called the invitations. A few years later, our road crossed with the folks from Cosmos City, and we then from there on contextualized it even more, and it really became the rhythm of life. So what is it? We can really say it's something to help you see God's movement in all of your life, but also if you ask the question, what does it mean to be a disciple and form disciples? This is how we really make it very, very practical. So this morning we're going to talk you through what it means. What does the rhythm of life mean? But yeah, so just a small greeting from me, Adri-Marie, and Tom, and Anathi. So I will be asking us three hosting the conversation today. And I wondered, Tom, if you can put up the rhythm as it is.
I can do
just
that.
For us to get.
Hi from my side too. Here we go.
There we go. So folks, when we talk about the rhythm of life, this is what we mean, just a group of pictures. So maybe, Tom and Anathi, I can ask you also just to greet, and maybe also say in your own words, what would you say is the rhythm of life, if somebody would ask you?
Yeah, well, I can start, and good morning to everyone. Like Adri-Marie said, I hope I'm a familiar face. I think for me, the rhythm is simply a tool to help me have conversation with God, with myself, and with the people around me about what it means to follow Christ. And it's a tool that helps me to engage with that conversation at all levels of my life. To put it simply, that would be my meaning for the rhythm of life.
Yeah, hi from my side also. For me, the rhythm of life is an invitation to life that looks at the ways in which I can synchronize my ordinary everyday life into the invitations of the good and beautiful God. And it gives me language, and it helps me to have a mirror to understand what the invitations are. And so I find it helpful as a way to think practically what it means to live as a disciple of Jesus.
So we have a mirror right in the middle of this rhythm of life, and around it is a bit of a sound wave. So we really do try and play with this image of life as a certain song, a certain rhythm, and sometimes we are in tune with this rhythm and sometimes not. Right in the middle, in the center, is a mirror. So I wonder, Nati, if you wanted to say a bit more about the mirror.
Sure. So for me, the mirror is the image rhythm. And the mirror for me represents what is my image of God and what is my image of self. And questions around that is, for me, is when I think about the mirror, is what influences my picture of God. And I can ask different questions there. For example, I can think about the different names that God has been referred to in the Bible. And some of those names sometimes relate to me more, and some of them are a bit strange. So if I was to give an example, when God is referred to as a father, then I need to ask questions around how does that resonate or land with me? And then wrestle with that question is, how do I resonate with the truth that God is our Father or my Father? And given my experience and context, how does my own experience of being without a father help me relate to that? So that's deeper questions that I need to ask, and what is influencing my image of God, because it changes for me every time.
If you want to add to that, Tom.
Yeah, so for me, the mirror image helps me to see God, and I know also that that reflects deeply into my own self-image. The question of how wholesome my picture of God is flows into the way in which I will live my life. I think during this pandemic, I'm deeply aware of the contested nature of God's image. You know, some people say God has punished us, which makes me deeply uncomfortable, because I don't think that is the picture that is helpful. It's also helpful for me when I think through the images that Anathi imagined or talked about, to think through what it means to also bring those images into conversation with the life of Jesus, which is helpful for me. And it's in the middle of the rhythm, because that is really the center of what will actually bring my life into sync, is my picture of God. So,
and I also find that our identity, how we view ourselves, if we are not really convinced in our bones that we are loved, everything else kind of goes astray. So for me, I also associate this mirror of an identity of belovedness, and I think it's something I will work with the rest of my life. But I think that's also why we place it in the center, because we become like the God we serve. And there's so many subconscious pictures that both of you actually mentioned, some that are helpful or unhelpful in this road. When we move on, we get to a plug symbol. So that plug symbol we call the connection rhythm. So I wonder, Tom, if you want to lead us into it, and then Nati just jump in afterwards.
Sure.
Yeah, so this plug rhythm, we chose the plug because we, are energizing all of our devices the whole time. And so one of the questions here is the question, what is giving me power at the moment, or what is energizing me or giving me a life force? And part of that is figuring out in my day-to-day rhythms, where are these places where I can foster these connections? A lot of people, when they think through discipleship, would classically think about spiritual disciplines. And those disciplines, some of them are disciplines where we engage, and then there are disciplines where we withdraw. And so in different spaces in our lives, it helps us to think through where are those places where I can foster connection. And there are many grids that you can use. Classically, prayer and Bible study has been some of the bedrocks of most of the denominations. But there are a whole repertoire of different disciplines that can help us actually to foster these connections.
Yeah, and I think just to pick up on that, Tom, also the question for me is also important in terms of, for me, what it means is what also is draining me. So what are the things that are currently draining me as an individual? Another question is, how am I connecting to God? Which is also quite a loaded question, because different people connect to God differently. Even my own journey of connecting to God has been different, because it started from, I just inherited whatever way it was that my family was connecting to God, to having to think through about what are my ways or preferred ways that help me to connect to God. So I might connect to God by feeling and exploring nature, which might be very foreign if I was to have that conversation with any of my family members. So what are ways that I choose and find helpful for me to connect with God. That might not necessarily be true for other people. And I think for me is, what is my response to the ways that I don't necessarily practice, but other people practice, and it's important for them. And so what is that conversation with myself and other people around me?
Yeah, during this pandemic, one of the people that speaks into my life said I must exercise centering prayer, which is not my natural way. So it's stretching. So sometimes, I like what you're saying, sometimes, we can also take on something that we're not that used to.
Yeah.
How's that going, Tom?
Very tough. I think
Yeah.
part of the pandemic obviously has introduced some of these disciplines on us, whether we've chosen them or not.
Yeah.
So solitude is one of them. Being on our own specifically has been, I think, a discipline that's been thrusted on us. So.
Yeah, and I think with this particular rhythm, it's so helpful to have friends that can help you understand how differently God works, and how it's really, how am I hearing God's movement in my life as well. I do spiritual direction, and that is a central question after the beloved question. The idea of, am I hearing God? Am I experiencing God? Is that okay? And we do need a community and permission to kind of learn how to see the signs of when is it that God is working with us. And it is also just true that we get burnout when we start giving without also receiving. And I think that is why this plug is also so central for us to really focus and talk about, from inspiration to energy to my connection with God. But I need an input in my life, because as a disciple, I'm going to give out so much. So the next rhythm you can introduce for us, Nati, is the lekker pot. So we call it the fellowship rhythm, or it's a picture of a lekker cooking pot.
Yes, and for me, the fellowship rhythm is an invitation for me to think about, who am I journeying with? Who are the people that I am working with in my life? And similar to the plug, it could also be for me an invitation is, who are the people that are giving me energy, and who are the people that drain me? Often, Adri, we talk about duty-free relationships. And what that means is just people that you can just be with, and have conversation and connect. And so for me, I think that's one of my most important rhythms to think about. Who am I journeying with, particularly in this journey of faith? And what are the different inputs from relationships that I'm getting, and how am I showing up in relationships? I think for me, that's also a very important question, in terms of how I show up and what are my reasons for showing up in relationships a certain way. So for me, the port of fellowship rhythm helps me to think about, who are the people that I am journeying with, and what is their impact in my life, and what is my impact on their life. And with the journey of faith, how are we shaping each other to wrestle with this question of what it means to follow Christ?
Yeah, I like what you're saying, Anathi. For me, my son early on introduced the word gang into our family about the disciples. So this is a question about my gang or my tribe. Who are these people that are encouraging me towards love and good deeds? I think it also obviously includes the closest people in our lives, our family, brothers, sisters, husband, wife. Friendship is a very underrated word, I think, in many of our cultures, unfortunately. So in this in this rhythm, it's working through these journey mates, the gang of goodness, and I find it helpful to listen to you to say too. There are relationships that are draining, which is probably not helpful always. God places those people in our lives for some reason, but it's more of an output usually than a filling in. So, yeah.
And I mean, I feel, sorry, just to add on that, I think this rhythm has been very important in this pandemic as well. I mean, I think relationships have had a spotlight and have continued to have a spotlight. And I've been seeing how important relationships have been during this pandemic in terms of who really am I gelling with, who are the friends that I can be able to say, hey, listen, this is how I'm experiencing these times. And I'm never so I'm anxious, and without me having to be worried that I'm gonna get judged. And so there's a big spotlight on relationships for me, and how important that is even outside of the pandemic. You know, they're working around and building those relationships.
Mm.
I remember when I, a number of years ago, was a high school teacher, and we had to, I taught life orientation, and at some stage we were talking about friends, and I really clicked that it is, no matter how old you are, you become like your friends, and that can either be a very comfortable and exciting thought or not an exciting thought. And this rhythm invites us to really be intentional. Who do I want to become like? Do I have people who will do some truth telling in my life? Can I be transparent with them? Will they show me on my dark sides? Will they tell me? And that it's more comfortable not to have those relationships, but it really, if you want to see who you're going to become and look at your inner circle, and it also has to do with all our intimate relationships. So how we are in those in a romantic sense, and are they healthy, and are we even picking up some skills with conflict, and if you're not in one, how do you deal with those things? So to know and be known. So we're going to jump to the next one, which is a beautiful tree. It's called the community. Oh no, it's the plug. Oh, the puzzle next. Sorry. The puzzle, which is the giftedness rhythm. We chose a puzzle because it forms part of a bigger picture. Nobody's gifted just for their own sake. You are uniquely so. So just as every puzzle piece has perhaps a unique contribution to the whole, that is why we chose that image. Yeah, either of you can jump away. What this rhythm means for you? What do you think the invitation is?
I think the invitation is the invitation of the fact that each one of us are created to be a gift to other people, and to think through what is the unique contribution that I'm making. It's an invitation, as you said, also to realize that you are not this gift on your own. So the puzzle piece has these places where someone else's puzzle needs to fit into my puzzle. But I think, in the Afrikaner culture, unfortunately, there's a big hesitancy about calling out the gifts that we have, because we think that it would make us proud. So Afrikaners a lot of times would say, if someone gives you a compliment, yeah, I really enjoyed that, then people will immediately say, yeah, all glory to God, it has nothing to do with me. Or in some instances, not even calling that out, because we don't want to give someone else an opportunity to become proud. So, the gifting has to do with our temperaments, our personality, our characters, obviously our spiritual gifts, the talents we have. And I think part of the joy is figuring out what it means to be people who are in a community that's making a contribution. One of our colleagues and friends has this definition of life where he says everybody wants to be a worthwhile member of a worthwhile tribe. And I think, the fellowship rhythm and this giftedness rhythm really goes together, is that it's an invitation to becoming a contributing member that is beautifying our life, you know. So it's an invitation that asks questions about how God has created us to be a gift for others.
Mm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
oh, sorry.
No, you can go
Nadia,
ahead.
I think that this idea of that I have gifts and I only come alive when I share them. It's not just for my own sake. It's such a beautiful concept to me. And Anathi, you are an Enneagram coach, so I'm sure you work with another dimension regarding this too. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Mm. Yeah, I think for me that's also one of the important ones for me, and important in a way that I like that it assumes that we all have a contribution to make, and with our different gifting, we can be gifts to each other. And for me, I think the bigger work for me in the puzzle piece is about acknowledging and discovering these gifts, and embracing them and accept them. I think the bigger work for me is about how do I have faith in the gifts that I have, because I think sometimes the temptation can be strong to doubt the gifts that I have because I see other gifts in other people that I don't necessarily have. And instead of partnering with those people, I feel like, oh, okay, I don't have this gift, so I'm not even gonna bother with it. So for me, it's about how do I then partner with people who have gifts that I don't necessarily have, and work with how do I not become envious of those gifts. And I can only do that by embracing and accepting the gifts that I have. And that's where that the gifts for me, they're not just for me, but they to make a contribution. So when I'm actually discovering those gifts, it's in service of something much greater. Yeah.
Yeah.
Adri-Marie,
I'm going to move us on.
No, I'm curious about what you wanted to say, and because you and Anathi were both of you going to say something, and then I wonder if you can't maybe just give us, because we're halfway through the rhythm, so maybe, you know, we're going to go through the whole rhythm, but maybe just at this halfway point we can just maybe pause a bit too, so that if someone wants to go and check out the rest later, like, so now we've already covered a lot of ground, so I'm interested in what you wanted to say, but I wonder also if someone wants to just take stock from here now, you know, what would be next steps. I mean, we're going to go through the whole rhythm, but
yeah. So the initial cycle is so overwhelming when one hears the rhythm for the first time, or even again, even as, and I've been working it with it, I mean, how many years now?
14.
14 years. But even still, when I hear it explained in its totality, so many things move. And I think, oh, I must actually, yes, that is important and that is important. So even as we're pausing now, to almost just think, going from what is my image of self and God, my connection, where am I getting energy and inspiration? How am I connected to God? Who's walking with me? What are my gifts? Of those four, which moves the most for us at the moment? And perhaps we can do that even together. I did actually say Nana what I wanted to, and I wanted to also ask Nati specifically around the Enneagram, but he did touch on it. And I like what you said about the envy thing as well, that is only when we're secure in it. But yeah, perhaps we can even model that. So with the four rhythms that we've covered so far, what do you find is moving within you? Which of those have stirred you the most thus far? For me, it is the pot rhythm. I am turning 40 in a month. So I have a real wondering about, I feel like a bit of a midlife something. So I have a real wondering in my heart that I'm carrying about who's going to walk with me in that that second phase.
Mm.
Mm.
Sure. Yeah, for me, it was while Anathi was talking about the puzzle rhythm, and I was just thinking about the invitations to be a gift in this time. I feel just a very deep sense of what would it mean to be helpful and a person that is gifting other people during this pandemic. So that's the one that stands out for me.
Mm.
For me, it was the connectedness rhythm, the plug. And for me, currently, energy is a big theme for me. So for me, I am feeling it's very important to think about what is currently giving me energy. And how can I generate energy, new energy, and where do I give that energy, especially during this pandemic? There's so many pools as far as my immediate response is to react to all those different pools. And so it's helpful for me to think about where do I want to give my energy and where is it most helpful to give my energy at this moment.
So shall I put
Thanks,
the next?
Tom.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'll
Go
put
for
up
it.
the
Put
picture
the slide
again.
on.
Yeah.
That was a helpful pause. The next rhythm is the tree. It's about community transformation. So how am I transforming my community? We chose a tree because, and it is very common that before loads of development, that the community gathered around the biggest tree in the village and discussed the issues of the community there. So it is really saying, who's in my neighborhood? How can I be a neighbor and of service and be part of transforming my community? Some thoughts.
Yeah, I think this is a very important one for me in these during this time of pandemic, particularly about who is my neighbor and how can I be a neighbor, and to stretch that, how can I be a good neighbor? And you know, part of what I've been involved in during this time is doing food deliveries and responding to people's needs, and it's been an important question around how are people's lives getting better because they've crossed paths with me? I think that's a very important question for me. And not just people's lives, but my own community. So, I mean, if I put context into the community that I live in, there's so much going on that needs my attention, people's responses. So to ask the question, what is my particular response in making sure that I'm contributing towards the transformation of my community? And that could be the physical community or the people around me. How am I being a gift to those people? Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I think for me, this specific rhythm is probably one of the biggest invitations out of my own blind spots. Meaning that, you know, for me, living in the suburbs, it can be very easy to just think of myself as an individual, me in my house here. So I have found it helpful to think through the question, what would it look like if the kingdom of God comes in this neighborhood? And for me, that has, you know, implications of, you know, being part of the conversations that's happening in my neighborhood, getting to know my neighbors. Those have all been very interesting and very practical Christian sort of invitations. When Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, I think it's very easy to jump over your physical neighbor. So for me, during this pandemic, you know, it has become clearer as we have curfews for walking, you know, just to be in my neighborhood as a neighbor and to see people out and about. It has been quite revealing for me. And I find it helpful to think that God also places people in a community to partner together for the good. So it's neighborhoods, it's obviously cities. We're citizens of South Africa. which becomes invitations of how am I as a worthwhile citizen, as someone that is building on what God is also dreaming for us together. So it's an invitation which I confess has for a long time been sort of a blind spot.
And as each of these rhythms have disciplines attached to them, I feel that this one has a lot of skills we need to learn along the way. I think it's easy to collapse this and say, oh, this is easy. This is like charity, or this is like just being part of a community forum. And those are definitely parts of it. But the idea to learn about asset-based community development, to learn how to take care of the earth, because this one also includes the environment and how to be a citizen on this planet and be a guardian of this planet in some way. I know if I even think about basic recycling, I'm still clueless. So I feel the learning curve in terms of skills, in particular with this rhythm, is a big invitation for us as followers of Jesus.
Yeah.
So
And I mean, I would add to that. I think also the skill is the ability to work with others, because I mean, in my community, there's so many people doing things for the better of the community, but it's mostly in isolation. So I think for me personally, the biggest skill is how do I partner with those people, and versus all of us having our own different journeys of trying to bring this transformation.
Yeah, I like that. It's something I'm seeing happening during this pandemic. Is it seems there's an invitation to lay down our little kingdoms and to partner together for the bigger good, right?
Yeah. It's a very real invitation. I'm going to move us on to the next rhythm. It is the resource rhythm. It is a photo of a clock we decided on. So we all have been made stewards of different things. We are stewards of time as long as we live. It's unclear allocation of the amount of time that we will have, but we are also stewards of things in our hands and our stuff. So this rhythm particularly talks about our money, our time, and our resources, and also our work. So it's a very chunky rhythm, but it's about really the heart of the matter is about, are we stewards with what we have been given? And basically asking a very central question, am I working for as if unto God, or am I my own boss? Whose stuff is it? So if I think about what is in my house, what is in my bank account, whose is it? Is it a gift that I'm being stewarded, or is it mine? Over to you.
Yeah, I think for me, as you say, there's a lot packed into this image. The clock originally was the idea of our 9 to 5s, that a lot of times in Christianity, what we do is we split our lives between spiritual things and things that are not spiritual. And that if we do that and we cut out our money and our jobs from our following of Jesus, then we cut off basically most of our living days. So I have found it helpful to think through a few basic things here. So I'll just mention them. As followers of Jesus, we have this radical teaching that everything belongs to God, which includes our money. And a reminder of that is obviously for those of us who are in faith communities to give a tithe. Is a very practical way of thinking through the ways in which we can be stewards of money. Obviously, there we confess everything belongs to God. And then I think for our jobs is to realize that my 9 to 5 is also part of this wonderful kingdom invitation. And for me, it's been helpful to think through, how is my job, dovetailing with God's kingdom vision. So my job is really a vocation. It's something that is also evoking something. So I found that quite helpful. Last comment for me is I've been thinking a lot in this pandemic about the words we are using for jobs. So some jobs now are essential workers. And I understand exactly what that means. It's the frontline people of which we are very thankful. But in the kingdom, every job is an essential job. And every vocation, maybe the invitation is to figure out how is your job becoming a vocation. So, yeah, it's an invitation for me that that grounds me in the totality of my discipleship.
Thanks for that, Tom. I think for me, it's about the questions. There's different questions for me around that. And the first one is, how do I firstly review the resources that I have? And how do I look after them? And I think, Adri-Marie, just to speak to your point, I think the question of skill for me also comes into this resource rhythm around, as Anathi, how am I living within my means? And so how am I being a good steward of what God has entrusted me with in terms of resources? And time, how am I using my time? I heard someone say time is the new currency. So if that is true, then how am I looking after that? You said something earlier around the rhythm, around the fellowship rhythm, about you become like your friends. And I think that's true as well in terms of how I spend my time as well. I become what I spend my time mostly on. So for me, the invitation is, how am I intentionally using my time for the betterment of the kingdom and my own growth, really.
Yeah, and you remind me, Nancy, that in the original rhythm, we had like some steps and a guy running down the steps saying, we called it downward mobility, and we said, instead of going more, upgrade, more, we want to live lives that is within our means, and we try to figure out what is enough so that I can share more, which is a total different mindset. It's a full kingdom mentality. And then originally when we contextualize it, I think Nati, it was you even originally that said, some people have never got up the steps. They can't even go down the steps.
Downward mobility could be, yeah.
Yeah, they've never been upward mobile. So this is what makes the rhythm, I think, for me, so accessible. So even if one is unemployed, Nati, what kind of questions would an unemployed person, because that's a big reality, would an unemployed person engage within this context of this rhythm?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing you said earlier, you mentioned even around things like asset-based community. So, I mean, I think when I think about someone that is unemployed, what is a resource that they have? And literally it is time. And then once again, so the question is, how am I using my time within the reality that I'm in? So, I mean, those are the different questions someone who is unemployed or not working would be asking. How do I, view my time? Where am I finding meaning in terms of how I'm spending my time? How do I engage in meaningful things while I'm unemployed? So I think there's lots of questions around that. How do I look after the resources or limited resources that I have? Yeah.
I'm going to move us on to the second last one. So, keep going, folks. We are on the circle of inclusion. So it's a kind of messy O. You'll see that circle. And it really focuses on the question, who is in and who is out, with the idea of making the circle bigger. Jesus was quite radical in some of his examples of including those who others didn't want to include. So it really focuses on the question of who's in and who's out, with the idea of wanting to include more. So what does this practically look for you guys? Maybe Nati, you can start.
Yeah, I think for me, this one is probably one of the rhythms that is very consistent as far as questions are concerned about who is in and who is out. And I think for me, that is a question I wrestle with every single day around, okay, cool. So what does inclusion look like for me? And how do I practice it? And what does it really mean? Does inclusion for me mean I'm just kumbaya with everyone and just accepting of everything? So what does it practically look like for me? And I think with particularly what's going on right now around the world and all the conversations that are currently happening, this one is a big one for me in terms of what does inclusion in these times look like for me, and who are the people that I'm intentionally and maybe subconsciously excluding because of my own beliefs, because of my own values and ethics. And so I think there's a lot for me that comes into that around how are my own beliefs and values, ethics excluding or causing me to exclude other people. And how do I then work with that? What are the questions am I holding around that? And I mean, if sometimes, if I mean, I can confess to sometimes I've seen my own insecurities causing me to exclude, you know, so sometimes there's deeper things that are behind the inclusion and exclusion question around how are my own insecurities or assumptions about other people lead me to exclude people. And what conversation am I having with God around that? And I personally have my own inclusion, exclusion conversations with God. I mean, at times I do feel excluded from a lot of things as far as my relationship with God is concerned. So how do I then wrestle with that and have that conversation about God, this is where I'm feeling very excluded right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in my own journey, this has also been, as a white male in South Africa, one of the invitations that leads me into a lot of confession of the ways in which I do exclude my patriarchy, the way in which I'm still dealing with my own racism, my own classism. So I think the rhythm of inclusion brings me to the darker side of my own humanity, but then also invites me into a community of love and inclusion and reconciliation. And I think, you know, for me as a South African, I really think that this specific rhythm grounds me into the nitty-gritty of discipleship of Christ that brought good news to the poor, that was a boundary crosser. And so I find in this rhythm a huge invitation within our context. Anathi just mentioned, I think we're within this pandemic now at a place where the virus of corona and the virus of racism is just being lifted out. And I find it very revealing that if I don't work on this, then I'm spreading this virus of exclusion. And as a disciple of Jesus, it's something that I don't want to spread. I want to learn how to be someone that is helpful. So I'm also deeply aware that as that circle shows, you know, it's a fabric that's being woven. So it's something that I can't do on my own. So I need female friends. I need friends that are from different socioeconomics. So it's not something that I can do on my own.
Yeah, I think we have such a deep call to be peacemakers, and we've been given this ministry of reconciliation, but it is very hard work facing our own shadow side regarding our own prejudice. And it's every human thing regarding prejudice, but we have different roads to walk with this. And I think to be able to be invited to that this is a key part of discipleship, And we can't just overlook it and say, well, I'm just fine in this regard. To really look at it, I think this is where diversity and being part of a diverse community is a key thing. And for often, it's the first step is just making friends with people who are different than us. And I'm also just reminded of Jesus's radical words of loving our enemy, which really sets us apart from just that's what makes this this discipleship real. It's not just like loving your friends; it's loving your enemy, whoever that is. I know that's Jesus. Are you guys hearing the ducks in the background here with me?
We are hearing them, and
Yeah, they
Okay.
create a nice background.
yeah, it is a
Okay,
nice
cool.
background. Yeah. In the original rhythm, before we contextualized it, Anathi and Adri-Marie, you'll remember that this rhythm was symbolized by shoes and the idea of walking in other people's shoes. And I can't remember who pointed that out in our group, but we changed it because someone said how nice it is for some people to put on someone else's shoes for a weekend or for a day, and then take them out and
Take them away.
and then be in your own comfortable slippers again. So, and that's why we changed it to this specific symbol of being woven into this community, right?
Yeah. All right, folks, so moving on to the last rhythm. It is a first aid kit. It is the wholeness rhythm. So wholeness is a layered thing, and we do have layered concepts in this. It is asking the question, in which way am I lacking wholeness? Perhaps where do I need healing? Where am I broken? Tom, I wonder if you can introduce for us.
Yeah, I mean, just after we let me just say, when our church community at first started the rhythm, this wasn't part of the rhythm, and it was our friends who helped us to understand that a big part of Christianity is dealing with a God that is not just a savior but a healer. And we jokingly figured out that a lot of us who at first thought about our spirituality could skip this part. And so, you know, I think following Jesus has to do with our bodies and our emotions. We live in a country that is deeply traumatized. This has been a rhythm that I've had to work with very deeply in the last decade. I had a heart attack. I faced severe burnout in 2017. And so part of my wholeness had to do with learning how to take care of my body. I had to break down the barriers as an Afrikaner male to go and see a therapist, which has all been part of my own discipleship process. And I think, you know, dealing with our brokenness brings us into deep vulnerability. It's an invitation to own up to our woundedness and to deal with it. So I found that a lot of those aspects of discipleship, I didn't grow up with those as part of an imagination of following Jesus. So the process of being in a journey of becoming whole, which is just another word of holy, actually, is a beautiful invitation for me.
Thanks, Tom. For me, the wholeness rhythm is, yeah, I think it's very deep for me, and it's a deep invitation in a sense that one of the things that I struggle with a lot is self-care. And so for me, the wholeness rhythm, particularly in this time, is asking me the question is, what is my relation? What do I believe about self-care, firstly? And what makes it difficult for me to practice that? And so that self-care for me also talks to how am I dealing with the realities that are happening in my own life. And how do I give myself permission to do the things that will give me energy and bring me healing, and help me to be less anxious. I think Tom touched that even as a country, we are a very traumatized country. I think we still have PTSD. Actually, I know we have PTSD and I would even say we probably have spiritual PTSD, and so what are my questions around healing? Forgiveness is a big part of my journey. And I often see myself resisting that a lot, about how do Adri-Marie, you mentioned about loving your enemy. And for me, that's definitely a muscle that I need to grow. In a sense that how do I respond and engage with conflict, disagreements, etc. So where am I lacking wholeness, and who do I need to forgive? For me is a big, those are two big things around healing and around forgiveness. And healing is such a long experience and journey, that actually that anxiety takes away from this ability for me to self-care. And so I think the question I'm really working with now is, what do I believe about self-care? What am I believing about self-care? Because I have experienced it as a luxury. And then how does that belief influence how I self-care? Particularly in these times.
Yeah, the image that comes to mind is actually for me a clay pot, which is, the community where the rhythm started was called clay pot. And I feel like the plug is helping to get something inside the pot, but the wholeness rhythm is addressing the holes in the pot. And we all are crackpots. That's funny. Not crackpots, cracked. So we all have holes in our pots, but it's about figuring out how to be less full of holes and perhaps more holy, like Tom said. And some of them are fixable. It's we will maybe have a remaining crack, but for instance, we all have addictions. So this rhythm is addressing that and saying, our addictions are things that is making those gapes, those holes bigger. So whatever you put in, it just flows out. It leaks unnecessarily so. And it is definitely a whole life journey in terms of wholeness.
So Adri-Marie, I like what you are saying, because it also reminds me when I listen to Anathi that we started with the mirror, and we are ending now with this beautiful invitation to wholeness, which Anathi aptly calls self-care. And that, our big invitation as disciples is to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And it's interesting for me how the rhythm, goes from God to community, to transformation, to inclusion, and then it comes back to ourselves, right? It helps us to understand that it's a total journey. And Adri-Marie, I wonder, as we finish our conversation, like for listeners that have toughed it out to this point, what would be some practical steps with the rhythm that you would recommend?
Yeah. So just like we did during the pause time, to identify which of those rhythms are speaking with us, it is really about figuring out what is stirring your heart. So your body is telling you where something is going on. As we were talking, you are having reactions in your thoughts that translate in your body, in emotions that, like, oh, yes, that's interesting. And the rhythm is about following that clue, the tingling, and following that road. The best way to approach the rhythm is one very, very small habit at a time. So it isn't about fixing yourself. It is about discerning where is God active, because that is really, this rhythm gives us language to hear where God is stirring. And then to take that stirring, say, yo, God, when Anathi was speaking about inclusion, that really touched me, and then take it into conversation with God, perhaps also with your fellow journers, and then figuring out what is a next step for you, one small next step. And if you can make that next step, sometimes that's a small once-off thing, but most likely it is a habit, new habit to learn, which is one small thing at a time. We can't do the rhythm, all the things, all the time, full guns blazing, and we will be exhausted. And I think to acknowledge you have existing rhythms, but we're going to address life change and things over the next few weeks. So, folks, we want to invite you to join us. If you are keen to hear a bit more about life change and how that works, we're going to, on Mondays, post a small reflection on a rhythm, perhaps that you can find it helpful to have a conversation with God about it and with your friends. And see what God is moving. This is just really like a metal detector to see where is God active and what is happening in my life. So this is just a small taster to sense the activity. So perhaps as we then close, I wonder if Nati and you and Tom would also want to say a final thing around an invitation around the rhythm.
Yeah, so for me, my last word would be the word Adri-Marie just used, is that the rhythm is an invitation. It's following the clues of where God is leading us into our lives towards a fuller life, a life that is in sync with the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. It is really about an invitation in our real life. God's address is our actual lives. And so thank you for listening, and maybe follow that one clue. And we would love to hear from you. You're welcome to contact us through the website, or we've got a Facebook page. And, you know, let's be a gang that is rhythming together, or rhyming together.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying, Tom, about the rhythm being a tool to help individuals, myself, to follow the clues. I like the analogy of following the clues of what is God doing in my life, and in the world, and in the people's lives around me. So that's a helpful analogy for me. And I think just to add to that, it's also that God is interested in all of our lives. God is interested in my whole life. I think there was a big theme around shadow sides, and we have us as human beings having shadow sides, and that God is also interested in that. And just lastly, this is for me a lifelong invitation. So it's working with myself, working with people around me, working with God, and it's an ongoing journey.
Yeah. Have fun. Thank you for watching. And thanks,
Thank
friends,
you.
for being together.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers, y'all.